Good evening, everyone. We are just 2 hours away from seeing President Joe Biden take the dais right there in the House of Representatives to deliver his second State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress. And the stakes are extremely high. It comes after a year when women saw their rights to their own bodies taken away. Books and lessons about Black history and LGBTQ folks are being banned. And very real threats to democracy are still looming large. This is an opportunity for President Biden to speak directly to the American people about where we are as a country and to set the tone for what the next 2 years of his term will look like. Biden is expected to tout his administration's accomplishments with an emphasis on the strong economy, super low unemployment, and receding inflation, while also making a renewed call for bipartisanship despite a divided Congress. In a just-released excerpt from the president's prepared speech, Biden is expected to say, quote, "To my Republican friends, if we could work together in the last Congress, there is no reason we can't work together in this new Congress. The people sent us a clear message. Fighting for the sake of fighting, power for the sake of power, conflict for the sake of conflict gets us nowhere." And that's always been my vision for the country, the president will say, to restore the soul of the nation, to rebuild the backbone of America, the middle class, and to unite the country. Now, that last bit may be easier said than done for a president who's working with a House now run by a party that's filled with extremists, quite frankly, some of whom just 2 years ago, in that very room, tried to overturn his election and install the man he defeated in his place. Tonight is also more than just a normal address before Congress for President Biden. It's an unofficial kickoff to his presumed re-election campaign. And it comes as he is facing some uphill battles. Poll numbers show a majority of Americans aren't really feeling the impact of his policies, while several of his major legislative goals, including police reform, voting rights, a national assault weapons ban, and codifying Roe v. Wade, well, they remain stuck in congressional limbo. Joining me now from the White House is Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. It's so good to see you, my friend.
Hey, Joy.
Well, and look at us in the color matching. I love that the memo went out.
I was thinking about that. I totally was thinking about that while you were doing the intro. I was like, oh, we're matching.
Mind meld. So let me ask you about this. And now, you and I have talked about this before in previous programs and even on this show. Joe Biden, part of Bidening is his eternal optimism. And, I have asked him this question in the past and been very skeptical about the idea of his seemingly firm belief that he can find a way to work with the other side. This other side, though, we are literally going to be in the same room where insurrectionists attempted to overturn the election and where some of the people that are going to be sitting in that chamber voted after they ran for their lives to overturn his election. What is the basis for this optimistic line, or is this good politics, but he understands that it's not possible?
So here's the thing, Joy. I think if you know Joe Biden, if you know this president and you followed him throughout his career, 36 years as a senator, 8 years as a vice president, and then these last 2 years, you would hear him over and over again talk about optimism and being optimistic, not betting against the American people, and the word of possibilities. That is something that the president has infused and has said the last 2 years specifically as he looks at the future of this country. And so you'll see that in his speech tonight. And it is incredibly important. And let's not forget, when he walked into office, right, there was the economy was on a downturn. COVID was ravaging throughout the country, throughout the world. And he got us back on our feet because he was optimistic, because he put forth a real strategy to deal with the economy, a real strategy to make sure people were getting shots in arms. And what we saw, because of he took that action, is we saw job creation, record job creation. 12 million jobs have been created under this administration. 800,000 are manufacturing jobs. You see wages go up. You see unemployment at a historic low in more than 50 years. And those are the things that matter. And one more thing I want to say, because this is really important. You were talking about the excerpts. There is one line in the excerpts that we put out tonight, which talks about how the president economic plan invests in places and people that have been left behind. And that is what this president has done. If you think about how he has transformed economic policy instead of trickle down economics, and I know you've talked about that, Joy, he put together an economy that builds it from the bottom up and the middle out, which means, Joy, it leaves no one behind.
Well, let me ask you this question, Karine. what is the White House take on why those policy wins, which are objectively factual, right, and the economic improvements that we see the numbers, we know that they are going in the right direction. Why do you suppose that that is not translating to more support for the president and more support, for the idea that he's doing a good job and making good on his promises? Because the polls are showing it is not breaking through.
So one thing that I know the president would say if he was standing in front of you right now, Joy, is he would say he would meet people where they are, understand that folks are still struggling. We just went through a pandemic, right? We just went through to once in a generation pandemic, which is a real thing that the president tried to get us out of and that we are getting out of. And then the other thing he would probably say to you, Joy, and I know he would say this, is a lot of the policies that got passed have not been implemented yet, right? If you think about the Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to lower costs for health care for many people, millions of people across the country, which is actually going to deal with lowering utility costs for many people across the country, dealing with a high cost inflation. That's why it's called the Inflation Reduction Act. We're going to see that effect, that implementation of it in this year. And so people will start feeling what the president's economic policy is truly doing. The bipartisan infrastructure legislation. Remember, in the last administration, and we've talked about this, Infrastructure Week was a joke. So many presidents had tried to do this really historic piece of legislation that clearly the president signed into law, fixing bridges and tunnels and streets. That folks are going to start seeing that. It's going to create jobs. It's really going to make a difference in lives of Americans and American families across the country. So a lot of the implementation that we'll see, where people will start feeling that, it's going to happen in the next couple of months. So there's still work to be done. The president's going to, again, meet people where they are. We're going to hear a Joe Biden speech tonight, which is going to be empathetic, which is going to lay out the progress that we've seen the last 2 years. But again, as we started this conversation, also be optimistic.
Karine Jean-Pierre, White House press secretary, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joy.
Cheers. Joining me now is Symone Sanders Townsend, former spokesperson for Vice President Kamala Harris and host of Symone on MSNBC. Jen Psaki, former White House press secretary and MSNBC host. And Michael Steele, former chairman of the Republican National Committee, MSNBC political analyst and host of the Michael Steele podcast. Hosts all three. We need to move you over to this camp so you can be hosting over here. I heard Stephanie Ruhle say that last night. We're your lobbying team. So I want to come right down the middle to you, Jen, because look, the empirical facts are the empirical facts, right? I mean, the economy is on the upswing. But to Karine Jean-Pierre's point, when legislation is passed the way we understand it, it's not like you pass it and then all of a sudden the money goes out. Right. Other than the stimmies, right? The stimmy was sort of a thing in your hands that you could feel. Knew it. And so people were like, oh, I like that. Yeah. So with this, is this just a matter of waiting for the trucks to start rolling and the, buildings to start being built? And that is what, in the White House's mind, will carry Biden through?
That's a part of it, Joy, and there's no question that if there's a bridge like that Brent Spence Bridge, by the way, I've driven over that a million times. It's scary. Once that's rebuilt, people will say, I don't know about Joe Biden, but I'm happy this bridge is rebuilt. But the other part of it is they have not done a lot of contrasting of who he is and what he represents with what the other side represents. And Joe Biden says don't compare me with the almighty, compare me with the alternative. He's not the first person to say that. Yeah. But that, I think, is kind of a mantra bumper sticker in their minds moving forward. Yes, is everything done? It's not. But give me more time because I have a plan and that's chaotic crazy over there. Yeah. And that contrast will help them that I think they'll start drawing tonight.
And it does feel like Republicans are trying to help him do that, right? I mean, the reality is in what we're here for. In a normal universe, Joe Biden, who's a white working class older guy, there's nothing about him that is threatening to like the psyche of the average Republican 30 years ago, right? He's not ethnic. He's not a woman. He's a straight white guy. Right? Let's just be clear. But the reality is, in this political climate, Joe Biden could literally save Kevin McCarthy's mom from a burning building and he'd still say he was the devil, right? It's like that is the way that the politics are built. And I look at these past approval ratings, and Biden isn't really all that different from any previous president. It's not that different. Right. But this climate feels like there's nothing he could say that would make his bipartisanship dream come true.
I get that, but I actually kind of disagree with it. And I think tonight the president has a chance to talk to working class Americans, as Joe has done since he was deemed Joe from Scranton.
Yeah.
That guy is the guy that can still reach into, as he did in 2020 and in 2016, to not so much 16, but it's certainly in 20, to reach those voters who are Trump voters, who aren't all in MAGA land, who aren't all kind of, conspiracy out and all of that, but folks who just want to, what's the future for my grandkids? What's the future for my family? As we're trying to navigate the inflation and the gas prices and the like. That, Joe, has a chance to connect a dot that the administration, in my view, up to now, has not been very successful at connecting people to the economy, to the global effort that we have in Ukraine, to healthcare issues, insulin that people need, manufacturing. All of these things that touch on people in ways that are everyday for them, that Joe needs to come forward and have a conversation, because that's the Joe McCarthy sitting behind him can't do anything with.
Yeah.
Joy, I think along those lines, that is a message, though, that also speaks to working class. When we talk about working class people in America, sometimes people hear, oh, white people, but working class Black and brown folks. I think that across the country, people need to hear how the Brent Spence Bridge and the project that is happening there means jobs in their communities, jobs, frankly, that for a long time were locked out for Black and brown people in this country. But because the Biden administration has a focus on equity, those jobs will now be available to them. And so I do think that it is a message that will be helpful, but you also have to just talk about, okay, what you have done, what you plan to do, and be very specific about what you think you can get done. And I think we're going to hear that.
We know that those